Mr. Henry Kwek.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am in full support of the measures announced today, given the dire situation facing the build sector. Our build sector is facing intense pressure on three fronts. One, the number of construction workers in the build sector continues to shrink. Even before the recent halt to new incoming migrant workers from the Indian subcontinent, many construction companies saw their workforce reduced by 15 to 30% due to higher than usual attrition. Among projects, there are uneven manpower availability among different layers of contractors. Post-COVID projects, given higher margins, are able to marshal more manpower resources. Pre-COVID projects are languishing as everybody is worried about the viability of these projects. And because of the labor shortage, we're seeing some workers asking for daily wages of more than $250. The majority of construction industry, I must say, understand the need for the recent curbs on new inflow of migrant workers. Nevertheless, the reality is that manpower shortage will only get worse in the coming months. 2. The industry is facing a surge in construction material pricing. For example, the price of iron ore has shot up more than 27% since the end of last year. 3. Construction companies are facing financing difficulties. As of now, the strongest companies, those with a good number of post-COVID projects, high margins and sizable reserves, are able to get adequate financing. However, most companies are struggling to get financing from banks. Based on industry feedback, a number of them, I was told, are resorting to tapping on financing companies and are paying financing costs of around 10%. In view of these three sets of challenges, M&D's recent announcements are very much welcomed by the industry. First, the sharing of the extra manpower costs for projects delays, as well as the manpower levy rebates of $250 are extremely helpful to the financial sustainability of the industry. Second, increasing the length of time for projects will help because for some projects, they can wait out the current spike in material costs as well as a sizable manpower shortage. 3. Easing of restrictions of Chinese workers is helpful. However, I do want to caution that beyond the large Chinese construction companies, many local construction companies may not have the links to recruit sufficient Chinese manpower given the current shortage of construction workers in China, and the salaries of Chinese workers in the construction sectors are 2 to 3 times more expensive than those from the Indian subcontinent. And it's not easy to persuade Chinese workers to do the full range of jobs, even if you can persuade them to come to Singapore. Now, beyond the measures announced today, I hope that M&D can continue to preempt this unfolding industry crisis. We have to plan for the worst. For example, it may not be possible for us to bring in migrant workers from the Indian subcontinent for many months or even beyond a year's time. And even if we want to diversify the source of migrant workers from the rest of developing Asia, it is also very difficult to predict whether those countries will see a surge in infection that we see in India. We must also plan the possibility of another circuit breaker should community spread become more prevalent in Singapore. Over the past few weeks, I've been working with the build sector to come up with some proposals that can form our contingency plan should the situation deteriorate significantly. Let me elaborate. 1. We can introduce more short-term measures to better utilize our existing workers in the sector. For example, we can temporarily increase the allowable age for migrant workers to stay in Singapore from 50 to 55 and potentially up to 60 with regular medical reviews. There are many different kinds of jobs. Some are not as strenuous as others. Let's trust that our company can strike the right balance as we increase the age in the short run. Another possibility is to get the construction companies and safety community to explore urgent and temporary measures to increase the allowable man hours. Based on industry feedback, the work intensity in many sites have reduced due to increased delays in material arrival and decreased subcontractor productivity. For selected work sites, can workers be given the option of working during their off days if it's clear that they have more rest during the normal days due to decreased work intensity? Of course, these proposals must be carefully considered and implemented, but we are in a crisis and we need to explore our options. 2. We must urgently explore new source of manpower. Many of us agree that the situation in India is extremely dire and it could take a while to sort it out. but we must diversify and explore other countries, knowing fully well that we cannot predict which sources will eventually come true for us. As such, could the government consider new source of migrant construction workers such as Cambodia, Laos, or even the Rail Islands in Indonesia? Beyond the new sources, we must also ensure that the migrant workers are free of COVID when they come to Singapore. Therefore, is it possible for the government to work with the build sector to set up and operate processing and quarantine centers in these countries? This will ensure that testing is done by trusted vendors, perhaps even using our own test kits. The facilities and cleanliness operations is managed by our stringent standards. Workers can use dedicated transport operated by us to come to Singapore. And upon arrival, we can test again, vaccinate the workers immediately while they undergo further quarantine. It will take a while for us to get this going, and some of these sources, even after we invest time and effort, may not work out. Therefore, I hope our government can actively pursue various options as quickly as possible. 3. Should the labour shortage continue, we can consider postponing new infrastructure projects, at least the big ones, or at least the construction phase of these new projects. Of course, the planning part of the project can go through, but we must reduce construction demand when we have a vastly reduced manpower supply, or the excess demand would lead to unnecessary cost surge. 4. If the industry condition worsens, the industry hopes that the government can provide added support with larger levy rebates. 5. We can prepare for a different implementation of circuit breakers for the build sector. The conditions are different this time. COVID in the dorms are still largely contained, and there's a successful segregation between the construction sector from the rest of Singapore, and we're able to do more frequent and extensive testing in the construction sector. As such, the industry hopes the government can allow as much work to continue even during a circuit breaker by ensuring the construction sites remain as airtight as possible. A new contingency plan for circuit breaker could include measures such as main con builders to have teams permanently on site with workers who are also lodging in dorms on site, main contractors having no in-person contact with subcontractor workers. Subcontractor workers may enter a site for a maximum of 3 days a week, and subcontractors should not be allowed to lodge on sites. All non-essential roles to be fully working from home, and permitting temporary living quarters again for larger projects. A lot of hard work will be required to come up with a revised circuit breaker plan that is tailor-fit to the present circumstances. I hope we can start preparing for it. 6. Monitoring the credit flow to our build sector very carefully. The government has done more than its fair share for the build sector. Nevertheless, the government support will not be sufficient unless the bank and financial institutes do their part to provide sufficient credit. 7. Consider further extension to developers on ABSD. Currently, developers have up to 5 years from the start of the project to hand over to the buyers. Beyond that, they have to pay ABSD. The government has already provided 6 months extension, but MOF can consider further extension if necessary, and relieving the pressures on the developers will allow them to do more to share the financial pain of the building contractors. Lastly, I would like to suggest that MND and BCA bring in additional staff or to outsource some of the coordination work. In my interaction with the MND and BCA staff, I noted that many of them are trying their best to help the industry. But there's just so much more coordination work ahead. As such, I hope we can beef up the staffing levels at MND family level, just as we have done so decisively at MOM. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now conclude. COVID has brought upon an existentialist threat to the build sector. Decisive and effective government action has put off the worst outcome for the industry, and the added measures announced today are very much needed. Should the situation confronting the build sector continue to worsen, I hope the government can actively consider some of the proposals that I mentioned today. With that, I stand in full support of the bill. Thank you.